My name is Margaret Ellison. I'm 69 years old, a retired librarian, and a widow for 7 years now. I live alone in a modest brick house that I helped pick out with my late husband, Thomas, back when life still felt like a promise and not a memory. I have one son, Liam. He got married last week. It was a Saturday drenched in pale blue hydrangeas and carefully curated music. But even as the mother of the groom, I barely existed in the frame. I wasn't in the family photos. I wasn't asked to say a few words. I was seated near the restroom at table 10, where the staff kept brushing past me with trays and damp towels. Still, I smiled through it. I smiled because Thomas would have wanted me to, and thank goodness I did. Because 7 days later, this morning in fact, my daughter-in-law showed up at my door with a man in a suit, a fountain pen, and a contract. They didn't even finish their tea. She placed the folder on my kitchen table with all the grace of a gift and all the pressure of a silent threat. "Just your signature, Margaret. It's standard. A power of attorney," she said, as if she was doing me a favor. But I had already seen the words on the top sheet. Full financial authority in event of incapacity or immediate consent. That's when I remembered Thomas's voice in my head. "You'll know when to open the safe, Maggie. Not when they say they love you, but when they show you where they stand." So I smiled again, took a sip of tea, and politely asked, "Would you excuse me for a moment?" I went to the study. I turned the knob to the built-in wall safe. I entered the code, the date Thomas proposed to me, hidden beneath his favorite sonnet, and there it was, a single blue folder, a handwritten letter in Thomas's slanted, purposeful script, and the final trust papers, $83 million. Quietly grown, protected, diversified, and left in my name alone, not out of secrecy, but strategy. Maggie, this is not a gift to spoil. It's an armor for when silence becomes your only weapon. I walked back to the kitchen with the same cup of tea in hand. The lawyer adjusted his tie. My daughter-in-law pushed the contract a little closer, the pen already uncapped, and I looked at it the way you'd look at a locked cage waiting for your consent to step inside. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask questions. I just said one word. No. There was silence, then confusion, then offense. "But why?" she asked. "Don't you trust family?" I smiled again, my third one of the morning, the kind that's tight, firm, and final. I trust what's been proven and what's been protected. She didn't stay for more tea. Sometimes the loudest power is the one that never needs to shout. If you've ever been pushed aside, underestimated, or forgotten in your own family, you're not alone. This is my story. Stay with me. You may find pieces of your own in the quiet places I once stood. The study smelled like cedar and old paper. It always did. Thomas had picked the wood for the shelves himself, insisting that real things deserved real craftsmanship. I stood in front of the wall safe, fingers hovering over the panel. The numbers came to me slowly, not because I had forgotten, but because I remembered too well. 12th of April, 1975, the day he proposed in the snow, under the Christmas lights outside my mother's house. He didn't kneel. He stood, firm and shaking, like the kind of man who'd seen too much of the world to pretend romance was clean. "Maggie," he had said, "I'm not offering you ease. I'm offering you truth." The lock clicked. Inside, the yellow light flickered on automatically, spilling warmth onto the folder Thomas had tucked inside, a pale blue one, thick and deliberate, sealed with a wax mark I recognized, our initials interlocked. I touched the cover like it might dissolve under my fingers. It didn't. Instead, it hummed with quiet weight, the kind of weight that says, this was not done lightly. The first thing I saw was a letter, his handwriting unmistakable, slanted, strong, no loops, just lines. "My Maggie," it read, "if you are reading this, I'm gone, and something in your world has shifted. This isn't a gift. This is armor. This is a plan I made because I've watched too many men assume their wives will be safe just because they were loved. Love is not protection if it ends with the man. This trust, these papers, they are yours. Yours alone. I did not make this to surprise you. I made it to defend you from surprise. Do not think of this as pride. Think of it as preparation. And when they come, and they will, Maggie, you'll have already chosen silence. And that silence will be stronger than any word they throw your way. I held the letter for a long while. Behind it were the document's neatly clipped tabs and highlights. A springing power of attorney. Not active unless I became incapacitated, meaning no one could touch it unless I was unable to speak. Thomas had also arranged for his own lawyer to handle the trust. His name was on the attached card, handwritten, embossed. A man from Connecticut, loyal but discreet. I exhaled. For the first time since the wedding, I felt something shift. The air in the safe was still warm from the light, and for some reason, it felt like Thomas had just been there. His warmth, his weight, his care still embedded in the fabric of the folder. There was no vanity in what he had done, no showmanship, just quiet, meticulous defense. That was who Thomas had always been. While others bought flashy suits and fast cars in their 50s, he invested in water rights. While my friends went to Hawaii, he planted walnut trees that would take 15 years to bear fruit. He didn't just plan for tomorrow, he planned for the storm after tomorrow. And now I was standing in the eye of that storm. 3 days ago, I had sat at Liam's wedding, invisible, in my navy blue dress. I had given up my spot on the head table so that the lighting would be better for the photos. I had swallowed the speech I wrote because no one asked me to speak. I had watched my son thank his wife's parents for making this dream day possible, never mentioning that I paid for the catering. But today I held the file that reminded me of something Thomas had said not long before he passed. There will come a day when someone asks you to shrink. Don't argue. Don't explain. Just know where you've placed your armor. I traced the wax seal one more time, then closed the folder gently. The contrast between this, his deliberate calm, and the rushed, cheerful aggression of my daughter-in-law this morning couldn't have been clearer. She'd smiled as she pushed the contract toward me. She'd called it just a technicality. She'd worn cream silk and heels too high for mourning. Thomas would have seen through it in a heartbeat. He always did. And now, so did I. I put the folder back in the safe, closed the door, turned off the light, and in that quiet room, I finally felt the first flicker of lightness in my chest since the wedding. Like the glow from that tiny safe bulb had spread across my ribs. I wasn't alone. Not really. Not with what he left behind. Not when I had something stronger than resentment, preparation. I remember the wedding in fragments, the soft haze of August sun pouring through the chapel windows, the scent of buttercream frosting rising from a 6-tier cake, the swish of chiffon dresses gliding past me like I was part of the furniture. Liam looked handsome. Of course he did. I'd pressed his suit myself the night before. He had always looked sharp in navy, but the sharpest thing that day wasn't his jawline or his tie. It was where they sat me. Table 10, back left, next to the utility closet, across from the restrooms, near enough to hear the whoosh of the automatic flush every 5 minutes, but not near enough to see the head table without craning my neck. I sat next to Uncle Brett, who was already half drunk by the cocktail hour, and an elderly cousin from Lisa's side who mistook me for a waitress. They gave me a small printed name card, Margaret E. No last name, like I was a guest at a charity fundraiser, not the mother of the groom. No speech, no flower corsage, no photograph just for us, just mother and son. When they danced their first dance, no one tapped my shoulder to join. But what broke me wasn't the oversight. It was the moment the band shifted into a familiar melody. What a wonderful world. a song Liam and I used to dance to in the kitchen when he was little, standing on my feet, clinging to my waist. It was their mother-son dance, but not with me. It was Lisa's mother he twirled. She giggled, light and perfect in her silver dress, and the guests clapped like it was natural. And I just watched from behind a bouquet centerpiece too tall for anyone at my table to really see through. I had to lean to the side to find a tiny space between the spray of orchids, to watch my son twirl another woman on the floor where I was meant to be. My spine bent like a question mark, and in that moment, I felt small, like a forgotten chord in a song I used to know by heart. The photographer passed me 5 times, never once asked if I wanted a solo portrait. The only photo I appeared in was a blurry one during the cake cutting, my hand half visible holding a napkin. I ate my dinner in silence, lukewarm chicken, wilted greens. No one asked if I liked the wine, even though I was the one who paid for it. Lisa's parents stood up midway through dessert to give a speech. They called Liam the best decision our daughter ever made. They thanked everyone who made today possible, and they ended by saying, "We feel like he's one of our own now." There was applause, and then the lights dimmed for dancing. No mention of me, no toast to the woman who raised him, no gratitude for the savings I'd emptied to make this day shimmer. I excused myself and went to the restroom twice. Not because I needed to, but because it was the only place I could go where no one would notice I was gone. When I returned, my seat had been taken by a server stacking empty plates. I stood there for a few seconds, unsure if I should reclaim it. Then I walked outside instead. The night air was cooler than I expected. Cicadas hummed like lullabies for old wounds. I leaned against a column and looked back through the glass doors. They were laughing, dancing, celebrating, and I was just a silhouette behind the ivy-covered arch, a guest in a memory I wasn't invited to fully join. And yet, when Liam passed me on his way to the bar, he smiled and said, "Having fun, Mom?" I smiled back, because that's what mothers do. We smile even when our hearts are shrinking like wool in hot water. That night, I returned home with swollen feet, a wilted hairpin, and a silence I couldn't yet name. But it had started. The erosion, the vanishing. I was no longer Margaret Ellison, mother of the groom. I was just a seat filler at table 10. And the worst part? No one noticed. No one even looked twice. But I did. I saw everything. I felt every inch of it press into my ribs. And now, days later, when Lisa showed up with that lawyer and that contract, I realized that table placement wasn't a mistake. It was a message. And I had finally read it. I spent 42 years among books. The smell of aged paper and polished oak became more familiar to me than perfume or fresh-cut flowers. People think librarians just check out books and shush noisy kids. But the truth is, we're keepers of order, of systems, of things that don't scream for attention, but hold the world together in silence, like spines on a shelf, like women like me. My name is Margaret Ellison, and for over 4 decades, I was the senior librarian at the Chestnut Hill Public Library, 6 days a week, 7:45 sharp, keys in hand. I knew which biographies hadn't been borrowed in years, which student always returned books late but wrote thank you notes. There's something sacred about a space where stories rest, where knowledge whispers, never shouts. And in that quiet, I found my rhythm. I wasn't loud, but I was steady. I wasn't flashy, but I was dependable. And people came to trust that. My fingers knew the difference between vellum and paperback. My eyes could find a misplaced volume across the room. And my heart believed that doing small things well still mattered. That's how I lived my life, with rules, with care, with devotion. Thomas understood that about me. He was the only one who ever truly did. My husband didn't wear designer suits or drive a flashy car. He wore the same leather belt for 20 years. He kept receipts in dated envelopes. And every Thursday, he polished his shoes, even if he had nowhere to go. He worked for decades in real estate, quietly buying, quietly building. No one knew how much he'd amassed, not even me, until after he passed. That's when I found the file, neatly labeled, dated, indexed. 27 properties, 4 holding companies, a separate account, untouched since 1993. $83 million. All legal. All his. All ours. But what struck me more than the number was the note he left me, tucked between 2 blueprints. It read, "Don't let this become a weapon in someone else's hands. This isn't inheritance. It's armor." I cried for hours that night, not because I was rich, but because I realized he had spent his life building something to outlast himself, not a legacy, a shield, and he trusted me to know when to use it. People look at women like me and assume we don't understand money, that we don't know strategy, that we're just sweet, faded photographs in someone else's album. But Thomas knew better. He watched me rebuild our household on a librarian's salary when the housing crisis hit. He watched me stretch casseroles into 3-day meals. He watched me cover Liam's tuition when his scholarship fell short, without complaint. He once told me, "You don't need to roar, Maggie. You just need to know when to close the book and lock the cabinet." That afternoon, I walked into our old home library. The dust danced in beams of amber light. I ran my hand over the spines, familiar titles, worn edges, initials penciled in the margins. I pulled out a volume at random, Willa Cather. Inside was a pressed flower, still faintly pink after all these years. And I thought, this is what it means to be forgotten by the world but remembered by someone who mattered. I stood there for a long time, letting the weight of silence wrap around me like a soft coat. Not grief, not regret, just presence. A woman who had always done the right thing, even when no one was watching. And in that moment, I didn't feel small. I felt rooted, because the world may not have seen me, but Thomas did. And I see myself now, too. After I put the file back into the safe, my fingers still trembled, not from fear, but from clarity. It was time to call Eugene. Eugene Wallace had been Thomas's oldest friend. They met in college, bonded over philosophy classes and cheap cigars. He became our lawyer when Thomas bought his first property. And even after Thomas passed, Eugene called every Christmas, without fail. He lived alone now, somewhere near Montpellier. Just him and a half-blind bulldog named Nino. I still had his number. Taped inside the back cover of the Federalist Papers, Thomas's favorite, right where he used to keep the important names, the ones you don't search on a phone but carry in your bones. I dialed. The line rang 3 times, then a crackled, "Ellison residence, well, mine now. Speak fast, I don't hear slow." "Eugene," I said. "It's Margaret." A pause, then a slow inhale, like an old engine restarting. "Well, I'll be... Margaret, is that really you? You still breathing without that stubborn man of yours?" "I am. Still cooking for 2 out of habit." He chuckled, raspy and warm. "Then you're doing just fine." I told him everything. The visit, the folder, the audacity, how she stood there with that lawyer who looked 12, offering me tea in my own kitchen while slipping paperwork between my hands. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked only one thing. "What kind of documents did she bring?" "A full power of attorney," I said. "She wanted me to sign it on the spot." He cursed under his breath, the way only retired lawyers and war veterans do, with restraint and precision. "That's not care," he said. "That's control dressed in Sunday manners." He cleared his throat. "Let me tell you something, Margaret. Don't let anyone use the word worry to rob you of your voice. You've made it to 69 with both hands working, both eyes reading, and a mind sharp enough to see through smiles. You don't owe anyone trust they haven't earned." I felt something uncoil in my chest, like a lock turning. "I don't plan to sign a thing," I said. "You don't even need to say that," he replied. "You just live like it's already true." We arranged to meet in a week. He'd review everything, draft a response, and serve as my legal buffer. "You don't open that door again unless it's the fire department," he said. "And even then, check for a badge." When I hung up, the house was quiet again, but different. Less like a tomb, more like a fortress. I walked to the drawer where I kept old recipe cards and pulled out a blank one. Then, in thick black ink, I wrote, "No signatures today. No discussions through the door. All matters through legal counsel. No exceptions." I set it on the entry table, just under the vase of dried lavender. Then I added one more line, smaller, for myself. "I do not sign with shaking hands." Not because my hands were weak, but because they were mine. Still. And always. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not triumph, not anger, just boundaries. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is draw a line and not step over it. Not even for family, especially not for family. The kitchen light glowed soft yellow. Outside, dusk settled over the porch like a worn quilt, and in the silence, I realized something. I wasn't shrinking. I was setting perimeter lights, quietly, from the very place they assumed I'd be too tired to resist, my kitchen, and they were wrong, dead wrong. He showed up without calling. I saw him through the sheer curtain, my son, Liam, alone. No lawyer this time, no folder, at least not in his hand, just him, and that same furrowed brow he used to have when hiding a scraped knee. I opened the door a fraction, not enough to invite him in, but enough for him to know I'd seen him. "Mom," he said, voice soft. "Can I come in?" I waited, let the silence stretch. Then I stepped aside. He walked in slowly as if entering a stranger's house. His eyes flicked to the card still on the entry table. He didn't comment on it. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I once taught him to read, where he once cried over spelling bees and geometry quizzes. Now his hands stayed in his lap, tightly woven. He couldn't look me in the eye. "How's married life?" I asked. A simple question, but it landed like a dropped glass. He cleared his throat. "It's new. We're figuring it out." "Planning for what?" I asked gently. He hesitated. "Well, you know, the usual. Buying a house, starting something, maybe moving west." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I didn't want to interrupt the unspooling of his rehearsed words. Then came the quiet pivot. "Mom," he said, finally meeting my eyes, "there are just a few documents, nothing serious. They just help streamline things in case, anything happens." I didn't answer. So he filled the silence. "It's just paperwork. For your security. For peace of mind." "For yours or mine?" I asked. He blinked. Didn't answer. "Tell me," I said slowly, "what exactly are you asking me to sign away?" He shifted, looked toward the hallway, as if he hoped someone else might walk in and finish the sentence for him. When he finally spoke, it was low. "It's just to give us a little flexibility, financially, if something comes up." There it was, software, coded, but unmistakable, control. I leaned back, watched him, and suddenly, I didn't see my son. Not the boy who once made me macaroni art or who fell asleep on my lap during thunderstorms. No. I saw a man avoiding truth, a man too afraid to choose between loyalty and convenience. "I've already spoken with Eugene," I said. His face paled. "I didn't mean to go behind your back. It was just easier that way." "For who?" He didn't respond, so I said it again, quieter. "For who, Liam?" His shoulders dropped, and in that moment, I saw it. Not malice, not greed, but weakness. He wasn't leading this. He was following, avoiding conflict, letting someone else whisper what he should want and nodding along. I looked down at his hands, nervously picking at a hangnail, and I remembered those same hands, small and feverish, clutching mine in a hospital bed when he was 8. He had strep so bad he couldn't speak, but he didn't let go of my hand all night. Now, those hands wouldn't even reach for mine. "I'm not angry," I said, "but I am disappointed." His face flinched. "You're my son, Liam, not my handler, not my beneficiary in waiting, and certainly not my keeper." He looked like he wanted to argue, but all he said was, "I just want what's best for everyone." "No," I corrected. "You want what's easiest for you." Another pause. Then he stood. "Are you going to sign them?" I stood too. "When the day comes that I can't trust my own judgment, you'll know, because I'll ask for help. But until then, I make my choices." He nodded once, more out of defeat than understanding. At the door, he paused. "I didn't want it to be like this." Neither did I. He walked to his car without looking back, and I stood at the window watching his shape retreat through the glass. My heart didn't break. Not in the loud, dramatic way books describe. It cracked, quietly, like the sound of a winter branch bending under too much weight. Eugene arrived just after lunch. He was slower now, gray around the temples, knees that made noise before he did, but still sharp as ever. He carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had weathered more storms than both of us combined. His old Labrador, Boone, waited in the car with the windows cracked, blind in one eye, loyal in both. "I brought the checklist," Eugene said, tapping the side of his case like it was sacred scripture, "and I brought the stamps." He meant the red ones, the kind that leave a mark no one can argue with. We sat at my kitchen table, again. Only this time, it wasn't a place of tension. It was strategy. It was defense. We began with the essentials, updating my power of attorney, springing, not durable, meaning it only takes effect when I'm medically declared incapacitated. Then we layered on extra protection, secondary passcodes for bank transfers, 2 new safes, 1 for personal documents, 1 for asset deeds. We restructured the trust just slightly, inserting a no contest clause. If anyone tries to challenge your will or trust, they get nothing. Not a penny, Eugene said. It's not revenge, it's insurance. We worked in silence mostly, the kind of silence only 2 old friends can share without discomfort. Papers shuffled, pens scratched, stamps thudded. Every time Eugene pressed one of those thick red stamps onto the page, it echoed. Thud. Initial declaration. Thud. Power of attorney override. Thud. Emergency access restrictions. To anyone else, it might have sounded like bureaucracy. To me, it sounded like armor. With every seal, I felt steadier, not just protected, prepared. Eugene slid a stack toward me. "These are copies for your records, and this," he said, tapping a smaller folder, "you give to no one but me or the bank manager. Understand?" I nodded. He leaned back, folding his hands over his belly. "You did good, Margaret. Better than most. Better than many men would." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "I never wanted it to come to this," I whispered. "None of us do," he replied, "but we prepare anyway." We drank coffee after. Boone barked once from the car as if checking in. Eugene laughed. Even the dog knows time's ticking. Before he left, I walked him to the door. He turned and looked at me the way only someone who knew Thomas could. A look that saw all the grief I'd never spoken out loud. "You're not doing this to be cold," he said. "You're doing it so you don't get burned." And then he left. After the door clicked shut, I turned to the fridge, pulled a blank sticky note from the pad, wrote down the 3 words I would follow like gospel. Hold line, ask twice, sign slow. I stuck it on the refrigerator just above the magnets from Thomas's last road trip, next to a faded photo of Liam in middle school, grinning with a fish nearly bigger than him. I stared at that photo for a long time, let myself feel whatever that meant. Then I turned back toward the table. The red seals on the legal forms shimmered faintly under the kitchen light, like battle medals or prayers. Each one had weight, not just ink. They were saying what I couldn't shout, that I had drawn a line, that I was no longer just someone's mother or widow or vulnerable old woman. I was the keeper of something earned, and I was no longer afraid to defend it. I only went to the pharmacy that afternoon to refill my calcium tablets. It was routine, like most things in my life. White paper bag, cold linoleum floor, the faint hum of the refrigerators behind the counter. But as I stepped out, the weight of a conversation caught me mid-step. Two voices, familiar, sharp. I didn't mean to stop. I didn't mean to hide behind the row of cart returns in the parking lot. But instinct froze me in place. "Alyssa, we don't have time to argue," the woman snapped. Her voice, Marjorie, Alyssa's mother. "You told me she'd sign," Alyssa hissed. "You said she was just lonely and old and would go along." My ears rang. I lowered my head slightly, pretending to adjust the bag in my hand. They were just 20 feet away, facing each other, not noticing me. "I said she seemed easy," Marjorie said. "That's not the same, and I didn't know she had a lawyer up her sleeve." A pause, a shuffle of feet. "Do you know how bad it's going to look if we default?" Alyssa asked, panic edging into her voice. "We used wedding deposits as forward collateral. If Margaret doesn't sign that document, we can't release the funds. We can't pay off the decorator, the band, God, even the damn marquee rental." Marjorie exhaled sharply. "Then make her sign." "I tried," Alyssa said bitterly. "She's harder than she looks. I thought Liam could convince her, but he's being weird. He's hesitating." Another pause, then the sentence that cut through me like glass. "We need that signature before the 15th. You know that. If she doesn't sign, we're finished. I mean it, Mom. Everything falls apart." The 15th. That was 6 days away. And just like that, all the pieces fell into place. The visit with the lawyer, the hesitant tone in Liam's voice, the sudden kindness, the just making sure you're okay phone calls. It had nothing to do with love, nothing to do with concern. It was about money, about a shortfall no one told me about a wedding built on borrowed time and borrowed funds, on illusions paid for with overdrafts and risks. My presence at the wedding? Irrelevant. My absence from the photos? Intentional. But my signature? That was essential. That was the real invitation. Not to celebrate, to save them. I stood there as the wind picked up, carrying the scent of dried leaves and asphalt. My paper bag crinkled slightly in my hand. Alyssa's voice softened suddenly as if trying to comfort herself more than Marjorie. "She's just a widow, Mom. She probably doesn't even know what she's sitting on. Liam said she still uses paper ledgers for her bills." My cheeks flushed, not with shame, but fury, because they had mistaken quiet for cluelessness, politeness for passivity, restraint for weakness. They thought I was some relic, convenient, outdated, and just smart enough to be manipulated. I walked away before I heard more. I didn't need to. I didn't need to hear how they planned to circle back with Liam. I didn't need to hear what else they might leverage. Guilt, loyalty, nostalgia. I already knew. As I stepped into my car, I placed the pharmacy bag beside me and rested my hands on the wheel. The world felt colder, but clearer. This wasn't about family. This wasn't even about inheritance. It was a transaction dressed up as love, an ambush wearing wedding lace. I drove home in silence, didn't turn on the radio, didn't cry. Instead, I repeated one sentence in my mind, over and over again. They thought I didn't know, but I did now, and knowing changes everything. That night, I sat in the quiet with the sleeves of Thomas's flannel shirt twisted in my hands. It still smelled faintly of him, pine, ink, and the trace of that old cedar cologne he wore for 40 years straight. The buttons were cracked a little now, the fabric thinning at the elbows, but it was his, and it still felt like home. I pressed the shirt to my face, and for the first time since the wedding, I let go. No polite tears, no folded hand weeping into a handkerchief. I cried with the full weight of 40 years of holding steady, with the grief of losing the only man who ever really saw me, saw all of me, with the raw truth that my own son no longer looked at me the way Thomas once did, with pride, with trust, with love that didn't ask for signatures. My shoulders shook. The sobs didn't ask for permission. They came like rain finally finding cracks in a dry wall. And when I gasped for breath, I wasn't crying like a woman who'd been strong. I was crying like a woman who had been silent too long. I whispered into the cotton collar, "Can you see this, Thomas? Do you see what's become of our boy? He doesn't even meet my eyes anymore." I pulled the shirt tighter, as if it could wrap around the hollow space in my chest. There was something brutal in the kind of cry where no one's watching, where you're not trying to be composed, where the truth is so sharp, so plain, it leaves no room for performance. I wasn't crying because I was weak. I was crying because I had carried everything, birthdays, bills, grief, gumption, inside my spine like a steel beam. And somewhere along the way, I became invisible. To them, to Liam, to myself. And in that moment, with Thomas's shirt clutched against my ribs, I finally admitted a truth I had been avoiding. Love, when unreturned, becomes weight. And I had been lifting dead weight for far too long. I sat on the edge of my bed until my tears dried on their own. No tissues, no soothing music, just the sound of breath coming back to rhythm, the sound of grief completing one of its ugly, necessary cycles. In the dim light of my bedroom, I looked around, not for anyone, but to remind myself I was still here, still present, still Margaret. And though my hands were wrinkled and my name was often forgotten in family conversations, I was not disposable. I was not confused. And I was no longer going to be the convenient silence they placed at the end of a table or at the foot of a contract. That night, I didn't make a grand plan, didn't vow revenge, didn't whisper threats. But I did fold Thomas's shirt carefully. I smoothed every wrinkle with the back of my hand, and I placed it, not in the closet, but on my desk, where I could see it in the morning, where I could remember the man who saw my worth, even in sweat and grief and librarian cardigans, where I could remember myself before the world asked me to shrink. By the time I turned, off the light, the air had changed. Nothing outside had shifted, but I wasn't just the mother anymore. I was the widow of a man who built quiet empires, the woman who had survived cancer, layoffs, and loneliness, and I had cried not to collapse, but to make space for the next move, for the next breath, for me. The next morning, I brewed a fresh pot of English breakfast tea, wore my nicest slacks, and met Eugene in his car at 9 o'clock sharp. It was time to begin my campaign, the kind of campaign that didn't need banners or bullhorns, just process, just paperwork, just red stamps. Our first stop was the notary, then the bank, then the courthouse for the affidavit Thomas had quietly prepared before his last surgery. Everywhere we went, I watched as forms were stamped with precision. Cup, cup, cup. A sound so small, it could be missed. But to me, it was thunder. It was a declaration. It was proof that I had not hesitated, had not caved, had not signed under pressure. I wasn't trying to fight them. I was protecting myself, layer by layer, clause by clause, signature by signature. Eugene had drawn up the springing, durable power of attorney and registered it through the county. The financial institutions had added voice print security and withdrawal thresholds. My health proxy was updated. Even the name on my deed was legally clarified. Everything had been locked tighter than Thomas's old filing cabinet, and each time someone asked, "Do you understand what you're signing, ma'am?" I met their eyes and said clearly, "Yes, I understand exactly what I'm doing." Back at home, I began pinning every receipt, notarized document, and confirmation letter to a corkboard in the kitchen. I added red string between them, one connecting the title update, another looping from the power of attorney to the bank security passcode. It looked like a war room, but to me it felt like a sanctuary. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I didn't call Liam or Alyssa or try to shame them into better behavior. I just stamped and stapled and filed and sealed. Quiet power isn't about denying anger. It's about channeling it into action that leaves a trail of ink behind. At one point, I paused to pour tea, and the sound of the hot water hitting porcelain felt like music. A soft punctuation in a day filled with signatures and seals. There was no drama, no yelling, just folders, stamps, pens, and choices. I realized that every time I handed over a document, every time I signed my name beneath Eugene's steady finger, I was choosing me, not out of spite, but out of long overdue loyalty to the woman who had waited decades to be seen not just as Mom or Mrs. Ellison, but as Margaret. When we returned from our final stop, I made a new index card and tacked it above the kitchen light switch. It read, "I don't need to raise my voice. The red stamps are doing the talking." I stood back and looked at my corkboard. Dozens of red circles, crisp lines, and stapled edges all whispered the same thing. You are no longer vulnerable. You are not a victim. You are ready. Eugene, sipping tea in the other room, simply nodded. He knew. He'd seen it too many times in probate court. People torn apart not by lack of love, but by lack of clarity. That night, as the sun set and bathed the corkboard in orange light, I didn't feel angry. I felt armored. And when I heard my phone buzz with a text from Liam, "Can we talk?" I didn't panic. I didn't race to reply. I took a breath. I added one final receipt to the wall, then I turned off the light, let the corkboard fade into the dusk, and went to sleep. The fight wasn't over, but I had written the rules now. I heard her heels before I saw her face. Alyssa stood at my doorstep again, this time without her attorney. No folders, no documents, just a soft pink scarf around her neck and a tote bag dangling from her elbow. "Hi, Margaret," she said with a voice so sweet it made my teeth ache. "I thought maybe we could talk. Just the two of us, like family." I didn't invite her in. Instead, I stepped onto the porch, gently pulling the door closed behind me. Her eyes glanced briefly at the note taped to the door, the one I'd written days ago in thick blue ink. No signatures, no exceptions, all communication through legal counsel. She laughed softly, brushing non-existent lint from her sleeve. "Oh, come on, Margaret. That's just unnecessary. We're family. There's no need to be so formal." I didn't answer her immediately. Instead, I looked past her, at the roses Thomas once planted, now blooming despite the late season. "You know," I said, "the thing about family is, it's not defined by blood or smiles at dinner tables. It's defined by who honors your boundaries when they want something from you." Her smile faltered, just a flicker. She adjusted the scarf. "I just think it's sad," she said quietly, "that you don't trust us, that you'd rather go through lawyers than your own children." I tilted my head. "No," I replied. "What's sad is how quickly love becomes leverage. You didn't come here out of care. You came here because you're cornered. You want something signed, not someone seen." She opened her mouth to protest, but I raised a hand. "I've been in this house since before Liam was born. I've paid off this mortgage, repaired its roof after storms, and filled its fridge even when it meant eating beans myself. And not once did I use those facts as currency against him." She crossed her arms now, her sweetness souring. "So this is about control?" "No," I said. "This is about truth. And the truth is, I will not be guilted, rushed, or manipulated into handing over power I spent a lifetime preserving." There was a long pause between us. Then I pointed back at the note on the door. I sign things when I'm ready. Not because someone's panicking, not because a due date is looming, and especially not because someone remembers I exist when they're in debt. Alyssa's eyes hardened, just for a second. We're just trying to move forward as a family, Margaret. I smiled, soft, not bitter. I am moving forward, and that means protecting myself, even from people who call me Mom when it suits them. She stared at me, waiting for something. Permission, weakness, a crack. I gave her none. Instead, I stepped aside, holding the door open just an inch. I won't ask you to leave, I said gently, but I won't play pretend either. If you have something to say, let your lawyer say it. Because in this house, my house, boundaries aren't up for discussion. She blinked, the air shifting between us. No more words. Then she turned, walked down the steps, and out of the frame of my porch light. I closed the door, and on my way to the kitchen, I whispered aloud, not to her, but to myself, I live in this house. I decide what happens inside it, and I decide who gets to touch the pen. It was late afternoon when I saw his car pull into the driveway. No texts, no call, just Liam, standing there, hands in his pockets, looking like a boy again, not a man. I opened the door before he knocked. He didn't smile. Can we talk, Mom? We sat on the porch. The light was softer now, casting long shadows across the railing. The wind tugged at the corner of the old welcome mat. A single leaf danced across the floorboards. He cleared his throat. She said she'll leave, Mom. It took me a moment to realize he meant Vanessa. If I don't convince you to sign those papers, she said she's done, that I chose you over her, that I'm not protecting our future. I didn't speak. He kept going, voice brittle. She said this delay, this legal hesitation makes us look unstable. The apartment deal might fall through. The investment partners are getting cold feet, and she's scared. I turned to look at him, not with anger, not with judgment, just a deep, aching clarity. Liam, I said slowly, you can't hold a marriage together with documents someone else signs. He looked away, jaw tightening. You think I don't know that? He snapped. I'm just trying to fix this. I thought maybe if you just... Fix what? I interrupted gently. He sighed, loudly, frustrated. This mess, Mom, the tension, the back and forth, the lawyers, I paused, letting the air stretch between us. I didn't create that tension, I said. I didn't ask anyone to borrow money. I didn't sign up for secrecy or manipulation. I've only done one thing, draw a boundary. He shifted uncomfortably. She's scared, he repeated. She thinks, if this falls apart, we're done. I reached over and took his hand. It felt both familiar and foreign. Rougher now, colder, but still my son's hand. Then maybe, I said softly, you need to ask yourself why she believes your mother's signature is the glue holding your marriage together. His eyes filled with something he couldn't name. Shame, maybe, or grief. I don't want to lose her. I know, I whispered, but you'll lose more if you sacrifice your integrity to avoid discomfort. He didn't reply. We sat in silence. Then I said, with every ounce of steadiness I had left, you are my blood, my boy. But if you're willing to trade me for peace, temporary, fragile peace, I won't be part of that transaction. His face crumpled for just a second, not a full cry, just a flash, a flicker of the little boy who once asked me to hold his hand during thunderstorms. Mom, he said, his voice cracking, I don't know what to do. I squeezed his hand. Then start by not asking me to do what you know is wrong. We didn't speak for a while. He left quietly, no folder in hand, no demands, just the weight of a decision he didn't want to make. I stood at the door long after he was gone, whispering to the wind, I love you, but I will not help you abandon yourself. Sunday came soft and slow, like honey sliding down a warm spoon. I didn't usually stay after service. I'd slip out the side door, nodding politely to whoever caught my eye. But that day, I lingered. Mrs. Halverson caught my wrist gently in the hallway. "We're having tea in the side room," she said. "You should join us." I hesitated, but something about the way she looked at me, kind, steady, knowing, made it hard to say no. The room was filled with women who wore their age like medals, creases around the eyes, silver in their hair, hands that had stirred thousands of soups and wiped even more tears. No one asked why I came. They just scooted over, poured a cup of tea, and made space for me. First it was Mary who spoke, adjusting her shawl. My daughter-in-law asked if I'd just sign over the house, said it was easier that way. My name's on the deed, but somehow I became the inconvenience. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Then Clara added, "Mine brought a mobile notary to Christmas dinner." The room chuckled, dry and sharp, a laugh that knew the weight behind the absurdity. Someone passed me a plate of lemon cookies. I didn't take one. I was still trying to find the words when Esther, who rarely spoke above a whisper, said, "After Michael died, his nephew asked me for the garage keys, said he had claims. I told him the only claim in that house was mine, from 40 years of loving a man with uneven socks and bad jokes." We all smiled, some with our eyes closed, some through misty lashes. Then Mrs. Halverson leaned forward. Her voice was gravel and grace. "We are the walls, the locks, the foundations of our homes. But the minute we go quiet, the world thinks we're done, that we faded." She looked at me straight into my chest. "But we're not fading, we're fortifying." I swallowed hard. That's when I shared. My daughter-in-law showed up with a lawyer, papers in hand. My son stood behind her like a stranger. They wanted my signature, my silence, my surrender. Nobody gasped. Nobody interrupted. They just listened the way only women who have survived know how to listen, without rush, without fixing, without judgment. I told them about the red stamps, about Eugene, about the folder I kept in the kitchen, about how Thomas left instructions like breadcrumbs for me to follow out of grief into strength. Mary nodded, sipping her tea. "My Michael did the same," he said. "Don't let grief make you small." Someone touched my hand. Esther, I think. "We don't need to be loud," she whispered. "We just need to be legally undeniable." That phrase settled into me like warm wool. Legally undeniable. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't bitterness. It was structure. Power wrapped in parchment. Dignity delivered by a notary seal. I looked around the room and saw them, not just as women, but as survivors of a culture that too often asks mothers to give and give and give, until nothing's left. But not these women. These women had kept receipts, kept their names on titles, kept their wills updated and their boundaries firmer than cement. I didn't feel alone anymore. That afternoon, as we refilled our cups and passed stories like heirlooms, I understood something. Quiet doesn't mean weak. It means wise. It means ready. It means we speak in ways they can't ignore. We don't raise our voices. We raise our standards. And we raise each other. It was late afternoon when I pulled the green folder off the shelf. The sun was slanting through the curtains, soft and gold. The kind of light Thomas used to call forgiving. The kind of light that makes even dust look like grace. I sat at the table with a fresh sheet of paper. No stamps, no notary seals, no legal headers. Just lined paper from my stationery drawer, and a pen with blue ink that sometimes bled if you pressed too hard. I began, "Thomas, it's me, your stubborn, quiet Margaret." The words came slowly at first, hesitant, like a stream just beginning to thaw. 3 weeks ago, I stood in front of our kitchen door while Alyssa handed me a pen and a contract. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I paused, tapping the pen against my chin. She didn't know about the folder, about your lawyer, about the springing clauses or the bank codes, but mostly She didn't know about me. I underlined that sentence once, lightly. You used to say I was the calm one, the peacemaker, the one who smoothed edges. You weren't wrong. But I think I confused smoothing with shrinking. I shrunk, Thomas. I shrunk for years. I stopped and looked out the window. The neighbor's dog barked. At a squirrel. A wind chime tinkled on someone's porch. Somewhere down the block, a kid was learning the trumpet. Poorly. I smiled, then kept writing. But that day, when I saw the lawyer's briefcase on my counter and your son couldn't meet my eyes, I didn't shrink. I didn't sign. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted revenge, but because, for the first time, I knew I was allowed to hold my space, to stay whole. A small tear dropped onto the paper, right after the word whole. I let it dry before continuing. Do you remember our anniversary trip to Michigan, the inn by the lake with the patchy wallpaper? My hand softened with the memory. You held my hand and said, Margaret, life is just a series of decisions, some loud, some whispered, but they all shape us. Well, this was a whispered one, but it changed me. I looked over at the envelope with your handwriting, your final letter. I hadn't opened it again since that first week, but I kept it close, tucked behind the canned peaches like a compass. I took a deep breath and wrote, Thank you for making me promise to wait. Thank you for loving me with planning, not just passion. You knew this day would come. You knew they'd test me, but you also knew I could choose differently. My hand trembled, not from age, but from release. I didn't rebel. I didn't rage. I simply remembered who I was. I chose boundaries over fear, silence, not surrender, and grace, always grace, over guilt. The final lines came like breath. I'm not hiding anymore, Thomas. Not behind kindness, not behind obligation. I am here, fully, still yours, still me, but finally, also just Margaret. I signed it with my full name, Margaret Ellison, then folded the page in thirds, slipped it into a cream envelope, and tucked it gently into the green folder, behind the deeds, the directives, the power of attorney. It didn't belong there by law. It belonged there by truth. As I closed the folder, I felt a strange quiet settle inside me. Not emptiness, not sadness, just stillness. Like a room after a symphony ends, where the silence is the final note. And for the first time in a very long while, I let myself be proud, not of what I'd protected, but of who I'd finally chosen to become. That morning, I watered the rose bushes along the front gate. They were blooming better than I'd expected, deep red, with edges like velvet. Thomas always said roses were stubborn flowers. They needed just the right balance of pruning and patience. I adjusted the latch on the gate. It had loosened in the last storm, swinging too easily in the wind. I tightened the screws, then oiled the hinge. It made a satisfying little sigh when I opened and shut it again. Not locked, just secure. Inside, I straightened the living room curtains. Just enough light, not too much. I moved the rocking chair back half an inch, adjusted the corner of the rug where it curled, set the kettle on low. I didn't expect visitors, but I was learning to prepare for myself. Just as I poured the water into the ceramic teapot, I heard the sound of a car engine. Familiar, hesitant, then footsteps, slower than usual. I didn't rush to the window, didn't peek. I just waited. The knock came. 3 soft taps, not the assertive thump of a delivery, not the nervous rap of someone with a contract, just 3. I opened the door. There stood Liam. He looked older than 3 weeks ago, not tired, just quieter, as if something inside him had shifted but hadn't yet found its shape. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "Hi, Liam." He didn't ask to come in. He didn't bring a folder. He didn't wear that rehearsed smile. Instead, he looked toward the porch swing and asked, "Can I sit with you for a bit?" I gestured to the cushion beside mine. He sat. We didn't speak right away. The silence wasn't heavy. It was something else, like a soft space where words were optional. After a while, I said gently, "I'm glad you came." He looked down at his hands. "I don't expect anything. I miss being your son." I turned to him. "You still are. You always were," I said, letting the words fall slowly. "But if you come back as a man who knows where the line is, not as someone looking for a shortcut." He nodded. I continued. "This house has a gate and a door, and both can be opened, but they have locks for a reason, not to keep love out, just to keep respect in." He blinked back something in his eyes. I leaned back into the swing. "Liam," I said, "you're always welcome to return. But you need to learn how to knock, not because I need control, but because you need to know what it means to be invited, not entitled." He looked at me. No defense, no excuses, just quiet. And in that moment, I didn't see the boy who'd once held my hand during a fever. I didn't see the man who'd once turned away with a pen in his pocket. I saw someone who was learning, maybe slowly, maybe late, but still learning. So I poured us both some tea, and we sat there under the soft rustling of the rose bushes, two people breathing in the same air again, not as mother and son with wounds, but as two humans, trying. And that was enough, for now. The board in my kitchen is full now. Rows of red stamps neatly lined, receipts clipped in order, power of attorney, banking access codes, health directives, estate protections. I don't look at them every day, but this morning, I paused. I let my eyes rest on the weight of each mark, each decision made not in panic, not in anger, but in quiet, deliberate clarity. I reached for the kettle. The steam rose slowly, curling toward the ceiling like a silk ribbon. I brought out 2 cups, blue porcelain with faint gold rims, one for me, one for Thomas. It's a ritual now. I placed his cup across, from mine on the oak table. Same spot, same angle. There's no need for words. He knows. I took my seat, wrapped both hands around the warmth of my tea, and I breathed. I didn't win against anyone. Not Liam, not Alyssa, not the lawyers. I won something quieter, something deeper. I won back the version of myself I had tucked away in silence, the part that whispered, "Don't cause trouble," the part that smiled through erasure, the part that stepped aside so others could shine, even when they forgot who polished the floor for them. That part is no longer in hiding. Thomas once said, "The strongest armor is the one you never have to show." And he was right. I didn't need a gavel, or a confrontation, or a public reckoning. Just my voice, just my line in the sand, just a door that opens when I choose and locks with a soft click when I need it to. And speaking of doors, I stood up, carried my cup to the sink, wiped down the counter, checked the latch on the back gate, then I walked to the front entrance. I turned the deadbolt slowly, click, not to shut the world out, but to hold peace in. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let me know in the comments. I read every one with deep gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.